show that we're going to do for you guys today is we're going to be talking about what new developers experience when they come to the YouTube API. So I personally love YouTube. I mean, I was talking to Jeff before I joined this team about how much I enjoy and I use YouTube for everything I do, right? And initially I started watching, silly videos on YouTube. Like I started watching, I don't know, name a silly video.
Cat videos.
Cat video. I don't watch cat videos.
Maybe toddler videos.
Skateboarding dog.
Okay.
Yeah. But as I started to use YouTube more and more, I started to realize that YouTube video is everything, right? I use YouTube to learn how to cook. I use YouTube to figure out how do I unclog my drain, right? YouTube is the resource for pretty much everything that you can think about, pretty much that you want to do. So I'm sure that you've gone on YouTube to learn about snowboarding techniques. And,
I enjoy also just watching from their cameras and their old snapshots and
right. So anyway, that was a very long introduction to YouTube, but you all know what it is now. So I'm going to talk about the new developer experience for YouTube, which, as not a lot of people know that YouTube has an API. And when you start thinking about the types of applications you could build, once you have access to pretty much every video in the world on every subject you might want, you can really build some very compelling applications. And YouTube has been pushing out more and more APIs to allow you to do this. And the three APIs that are public right now that you can start using right away are, in the order of popularity, I think, or the player API.
Let's not say popularity.
They're all very popular.
In our hearts.
In our hearts.
Yes.
First off, there's the player API. And the player API is what you want when you have a web page or some kind of HTML page where you want to display and control an embedded player. Right? So the player API is what you would use when you want to use JavaScript or Flash to say, skip here in the video, move backwards, enlarge the video, scroll. What else am I missing?
You could queue up new videos. You could create kind of a custom playback experience. Like you could get rid of all the controls. You could have your own playback. And you mentioned JavaScript and Flash. Just to make it clear, you can do HTML5 video playback too.
HTML video playback.
JavaScript. So we have a lot of really cool stuff to offer in the player API.
So the player API is kind of, you could think of it as one of the front-end APIs for displaying and controlling the actual videos. But when you start using the player API, the second API you really want to really make the experience better, make your app better, is the data API. And this is what I'll be talking a lot about today, or not too long, maybe 5 or 10 minutes or so. And the data API is what you would do when you want to query, say, what videos have you watched? With his permission, of course. Search by topic, right? Find me.
Dog videos.
Dog videos.
There you go.
Search by keyword. And there's a lot of interesting stuff in the data API. It uses authentication, so we'll talk a little bit about that. And third one is the analytics API, which I'm not too familiar with. I've been on this team for about a couple of days.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the analytics API.
Yeah, and again, we wanted these new developer experiences. So these are very fresh Nooglers, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about the analytics API. And this is a way of fetching information about the videos that are in your own account. So again, this is another authorized API. You have to go through the OAuth 2 flow first, which I know Ikai is going to be talking about in a little bit. And it lets you fetch pretty much all the demographic information that we have about who's watching your videos, how popular certain videos are in certain regions. We now have some information about the total watch time, which is really important for folks who are looking to see exactly how much of your videos are being watched. And we're pretty excited about it. It's currently in experimental mode right now, so it's not fully launched in its 100% final state yet, but we really do hope that folks are using it.
Right, and since it's an offline, what we call an offline API, you should totally start using it if you need this type of data, because even though, as Jeff says, it's experimental, what that means as a Google developer is that we may still make lots of breaking API changes. Now, we try really hard not to do this, right? We try not to break our users, but when an API is an experimental, that means that we're still iterating very, very fast. We're still not quite sure what exactly we want to do with it yet, so there might be breaking changes, but for the most part, it should be working. Right. So since it's offline, maybe you're pulling analytics to build a dashboard, or you're aggregating stats at night. This is the sort of thing that you would do with the analytics API. And if that breaks, at least you won't break users. So I highly encourage that if you need this data to start using this right away.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about. I just cheated. I just looked at the notes that I put on my thigh. I mentioned that the data API is something that you want to get into if you're doing any kind of YouTube application. And to do the data API, you need to do authorization. And authorization, so I've been at Google for over 3 years. And before being at Google, I worked at a place where I had the opportunity? Yes,
I think
the joy to work with OAuth.
Joy-portunity.
Joy-portunity.
Yes.
I had the joy-portunity to work with OAuth. And OAuth is this way of authenticating requests. Now, when you jump into the data API, you'll see that, holy moly, there are a lot of options, right? You've got the data API v1, v2, v3, right?
Yes.
You have client login authentication, auth-sub, and OAuth. What should you use? What should you use? And I think that I don't want to make any absolute statements except for a few. I want to make a few absolute statements.
Make as many absolute statements as you want, and I will qualify your absolute statements.
All right, Jeff will qualify, and if Jeff starts to go like this, don't do it. So first off, don't use the V1 API. Just do not use this. This is deprecated. I don't know what's going to happen with it.
I mean, it's going to follow our normal deprecation policy, basically, and that's all dictated by our terms of service. So I don't want to extemporaneously talk about what that involves, but you can look that up online.
Yeah.
And we're doing a pretty good job, I think, of hiding the V1 API from our current docs, and hopefully there aren't too many new developers that stumble upon it and say, hey, I'm going to get started with the V1 API.
Yeah. So I still see a lot of questions about the V1 API online now.
Yeah.
So already strike the V1 API if you're starting to dive into the YouTube API. So now you've got the choice of the V2 and the V3 API. The V2 API is pretty much the fully supported mature version of the API, but doesn't have quite all the functionality we want. It has all the, and the V3 API is kind of on its way there, right? And if you're starting a new project, definitely look at what the V3 API can do, because that's where we're headed, right? That's where the puck is going.
Yeah.
So check that out. And there are some things that you can't quite do it with the V3 API, so keep that in mind when you're designing. Just abstraction is good when you're writing code.
Yeah. So the V3 API is another experimental API, and everything that Ikai said previously about our experimental API policy and adding new features and perhaps introducing a few breaking changes also applies to V3. Right. There's not quite full feature parity yet. I mean, there are some glaring exceptions and things that are currently in V2 that aren't in V3, and if you need any of those, then V2 is the way to go. V3 has really nice client libraries, and I think that's the biggest thing about V3 that makes it nice for a new developer who's getting started, because you have a really rich client library experience, including good support for OAuth too.
And we've got to, a few things that we have got to do on our end is to really just build on those client libraries and show you guys how to build great applications. So right now, there are examples in JavaScript and Python, and we're going to have examples for many of the other popular languages too, like Java, JavaScript, PHP. I've been working on some Go samples, only because no one claimed those. So I said, oh, heck, I'll do it. So if you're programming in Go, you're in luck, because hopefully I'll be able to push those samples out soon. Yep. So the V3 API, even though Jeff says it's experimental, I've taken a look at the API, and I can't promise this, but it looks pretty close to what the final thing might be, plus we might add a few things. So even though it's way later along in its development and being pushed out than the Analytics API, which came out in, I think, December?
Yeah, I don't want to say that it's way later along necessarily. I think they're pretty much
qualifying my statements.
Yeah, they're pretty much both looking like what the final version is going to look like with some additional features. That would be my, not unofficial answer about the future of those APIs.
So what Jeff is unofficially saying is that if you can use the V3 API, it's pretty safe to use the V3 API and to start taking a look at that. Now, obviously with any experimental API, you're best off in an environment where you can iterate quickly. So like a web environment's a really good example, because if there is a breaking change, and there probably won't be, you can quickly push out an update, because most of the breaking changes we make to experimental APIs tend to be very, very small. Like we're renaming this function, or we're changing what this returns. So we do consider all of these things when we're pushing things out, even for experimental APIs. So on that note, V2 and V3 are your different options. Now, I mentioned earlier, maybe you want to write an application that says, help me look at my favorite videos and do something with them. Now, you don't need to write this application, because YouTube has a feature called favorites, and you can just go and look. But let's say you want to do something interesting with these, like you wanted to
You wanted to take a look at your favorite videos and find all the topics that are associated with those videos using V3's awesome support for freebase topics, for instance.
You want to generate, you want to translate all the titles into Russian. Roman New York is producing for us. You want to translate it all into Russian and email them in Roman, right? These are all things that you could do programmatically via the API. And and you need authentication to get this done. I mean, I can't just write an application. Jeff can't just show up and I'll automatically know who Jeff is, because that's bad, right? I mean, if we did that, it's not a bad thing. It's that if I'm a bad person, that would be bad.
Right.
Because then I would have access to your data and your YouTube, and I'd be able to act on your behalf.
And I will qualify that by saying Ikai is not a bad person.
I'm not a bad person.
Ikai does not want to act on my behalf unless I tell Ikai to act on my behalf.
Right.
So.
And thus we have this concept of OAuth. So when you're authenticating, you have 3 options to authenticate, right? So when Jeff comes to your application and you want to say, hey, Jeff, let me do stuff for you. Let me create interesting content for you. Jeff has to somehow give me access to his account. And there are 3 ways of doing this. One is called client login, where Jeff directly gives me his username and password. Please don't do this. I mean, we don't want to support this anymore. It trains users to give their usernames and passwords into third-party sites. In general, taking the username and password is a bad practice, and I don't want to encourage this.
And you can't actually do it in V3 anymore. So we don't have support.
You cannot do it in V3 anymore.
For client login rather in V3.
Right. The second way is something called off-sub. And off-sub is a little bit better, but it's not a standard. It's a standard across what we call GData across Google APIs, but that's going to be slowly overshadowed by OAuth. So off-sub works a little bit better. Off-sub works like this. Jeff comes, I'm a service provider, you are YouTube, all right? I'm just going to act this out. Jeff goes to me, and I go, hey, I want to show you, I want to translate all your favorite videos into Russian, or at least the titles.
Yes, I do.
Right.
Okay.
You want this.
Yes.
So Jeff comes to me, and he says, hey, I'll give you access to my videos. I don't just have access to his account. I need to go and kick him into YouTube, where YouTube asks him, hey, do you trust Ikai?
Do you trust Ikai?
Pretty much, yes.
So now he throws him back to me. And when YouTube throws Jeff back to me, he gives me a token that I can use to make API calls on his behalf. And that's roughly what off-sub does. And OAuth is more or less the same way. OAuth is the same thing. We call it the 3-legged flow because there are 3 legs. It's very confusing, by the way. There's a 3-legged flow where Jeff goes to me, I kick him to YouTube, and I say, hey, let me access this guy's account. And YouTube says, yes, you can access. Or Jeff says you can access, and YouTube gives me a token. Now, as part of his...
Sorry, to elaborate on that. Everything that we're talking about here also takes place within the context of a web browser. So this is all being done on a web page that's hosted by Google or YouTube. I think it's actually hosted by a google.com domain. So you're entering your password and username on a web page that's hosted by Google, or if you're already logged in to your Google account, you don't even have to enter any new credentials. It's really just clicking
and
authorize.
And a user comes in, and the user sees https://. So the user, as long as you don't get a certificate warning and ignore it like most users do, I'm rolling my eyes, then the user is protected from phishing and things like that. Now, obviously, you're not protected from key logging, but this isn't a security GDL. We're talking about OAuth. So OAuth takes us a little bit further with the concept of what's called scopes, right? Now, as an application, if I'm translating Jeff's videos, the scope that I want as small a scope as possible. I really only want read-only access.
Yeah.
So I ask YouTube only for read-only access, and when Jeff goes to YouTube to authenticate, YouTube says, well, this app just wants to look at your videos, right? So Jeff says, okay, well, an application that translates my favorite video titles into Russian doesn't need write access. I mean, why would it need to upload videos? Why would it need to like? Why would it need to comment as me? It doesn't, right? So he can safely authenticate, and that's just one more layer of protection OAuth provides.
And that's actually something that's only supported in version 3 of the Data API. Unfortunately, we didn't have that sort of fine-grained scopes in version 1 and version 2 of the Data API. You kind of had to request a scope that had full read-write access to your YouTube account. So that's another good reason, for the benefit of your users to migrate to V3, and that you can request a minimal set of permissions and make your users feel better about what you're asking for.
So when you're reading the documentation, hopefully let's do a quick review of some of the things that we've talked about so far. And I'll review again and again and again. So there is OAuth. There's V2 and V3. and we just talked about scopes. So these are a lot of the concepts you'll be seeing over and over as you're going through the sample application and documentation. Now, I've left out one more type of API call, which is also a very interesting type, which is developer key authentication. So developer key, you need developer key for this. You need keys for OAuth as well, and you get to these via the cloud, or not the cloud, the API console. So I don't remember the exact URL, but you could search for Google APIs console.
Yeah,
and it'll come up.
And we've actually had previous YouTube Developer Lives talks where we featured the whole workflow for requesting access to these APIs and stuff. So we could, probably on our Google Plus stream, we'll post some links back to those old shows that you could watch and see that.
So you go to the API console and you say, give me YouTube access, give me YouTube Analytics API access, and they'll give you the different keys you need to work with. Now, developer key access, now sometimes when you're writing an application, I don't need access to Jeff's account or Roman's account or Ibrahim's account. All I need is to say search for dog videos. And you can do this using just developer key. Now, we don't need the three-legged auth for this. We just need developer key, and in V3, you can just append this to the end of a URL, a REST URL, and say give me back the data, and that'll work. And you get the developer key via the API console. So what do you need for working with the YouTube API? You need to go to the API console. I keep leaving this out, but that's one of the most important things.
So this is actually a way that another way that version 2 and version 3 differ. In version 2, we did actually support like anonymous API access. You could use a developer key, and confusingly, it was a different type of developer key than what we're talking about here from the API console. But in V2 is optional. In V3, you do need to put a developer key or use OAuth 2. It's an either-or situation for all your requests.
Jeff, when you used V2 and you didn't use a key, what were the limitations that you would run into?
It's basically a quota issue.
What's it quoted on?
Yeah, so we...
You know it says trap there? I trapped you?
I'm going to also say that we have me talking about quota for 30 minutes in a previous GDL, which is super entertaining and just tells you how big an issue this is. There is like 30 minutes worth of content to talk about. But basically, in any of our data APIs, there is a quota imposed on the kind of the rate of API calls that you can make. And what we would do in version 1 and version 2, if you were using a developer key, I mean, there's a little bit more accountability, and accordingly, we would grant a slightly higher quota. So you can make a larger number of calls before you start getting rate limited. We also do have quotas in version 3, slightly different than the way version 2 quotas work, though, basically. And it's just a way to protect, it's a way to protect us from a bunch of things. I think, Ikai, if I remember correctly, when you were learning Go, I don't want to, say
you can.
I believe you walked away from your desk during lunch while you had a loop running, and
I might have had an infinite loop.
Yeah,
might have had an infinite loop running.
So we want to
made a mistake.
Partly protect developers from doing that sort of thing inadvertently and sending, potentially unbounded number of requests against our servers. Eventually, we start saying, hey, we're going to start rejecting these requests.
Yeah. So that's another reason. That's what that developer key is for. So again, the concepts that you need to understand when you're working with the YouTube API are, or at least have some kind of knowledge of, are OAuth, right? V2, V3, a developer key, the API console, and there's code samples. I think that's what you need.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks probably get started using the code samples, which is why I'm really glad that you're working on some, and we're going to put Ibrahim soon to work on writing some more code samples for V3.
Yeah. There's a lot of confusion around these topics sometimes, and that's why we like to teach them as many times as possible. So that was my spiel. I know I went on and on, but that's what I had to say, and I'm sure that over the coming shows that I'll have a lot more to add to this topic.
Yeah,
so I'm sorry for totally just monopolizing the time.
No. I mean, this is exactly what I wanted to get out of the show. And Ibrahim, though, we didn't give you too much of a chance to ask anything. I don't want to also put you on the spot, but if there is anything you wanted to bring up from your experience, you've been here on the YouTube team 1 week less than Ikai. This is literally your third day. Third day on the team and third day at Google.
There were vacations too.
Yeah, there were some vacations. This is true. So,
maybe I will ask you about, we talk about the data API, player API, analytics API. Is there a new starter, building your own website or app, how they all fit together into the big picture, how they play handy, or is it better to start from one API and start using the other ones, or?
Yeah. So they all do fit together pretty nicely, and you definitely. We do have some samples. The samples we have, for instance, with the Analytics API also include making calls to the Data API, just because you kind of have to. You need to get some information from the Data API first before you can use the Analytics API effectively. Like, you need to know what the channel is that you're running the Analytics API report against. So our samples for using the Analytics API also do show the relevant Data API calls.
So the bigger question here is, the use case. I like to come back from use case. What kind of app are you designing? Because the apps that you're designing might not use all three APIs, right? But I think that there are lots of apps where when you show a player, you usually want to make data calls also, but it depends on the app that you're building.
Yeah, I mean, so there are really common use cases where you want to play back a video but also display metadata about that video, show the title and description, or do a search and have the snippets, and all these are cases where you're going to want to integrate the Data API and the Player API, or the Data API and the Analytics API like we talked about, and potentially all three within an application. So I think we do a pretty good job of having some samples out there that show real working pieces of code. We maybe don't do the best job of highlighting them directly from the docs, so I'm not sure.
Well, let's fix that.
Yeah,
that's what we're here for. Come on.
That's something that we certainly should do. So we tend to blog about things, and I don't know if you guys have had a chance to go back through our 5-6 year archive on our YouTube API developers blog. So we certainly can't expect everybody who's getting started with the API to know that we had a blog post from 3 years ago in which we talked about this cool open source app that put together all these different APIs in a real world fashion. So yeah, let's work a little bit on discovery for that, I think.
Yeah.
It's maybe I'll have another broad question as a new starter. As I'm using these APIs, and if I ever have some problems, or if I think that there's something not working, or maybe I'm having some difficulties, what's the best way to escalate these issues, or file a bug, or get the fastest response?
Right.
Don't do that.
Well, eventually you're going to be the ones answering these. So until that time comes, so right now we're asking most of the questions that come from developers out there to go in through Stack Overflow. That's the best place for general questions about the API. Not really for bug reports or for feature requests though. So if you're in the situation where you really just are saying, hey, how do I do this in this certain language using the V3 Data API, that's a great thing to ask in Stack Overflow. It's probably indicative of the fact that our samples aren't good enough to help you right now, so apologies in advance about that. Or just general questions about why something isn't working exactly as you'd expect it, that's okay for Stack Overflow too. But then we also have a separate issue tracker that we use for reporting bugs or for making feature requests, and that just makes it a little bit more a little bit better for keeping track of things on our end. We have this public thing that we could refer to and say, hey, this is where the request came in for this feature in the API, and we can tell the engineering team, hey, we have 20 people that have starred this request, and it's pretty important that we implement it. And it also just kind of plays nicely with the Stack Overflow community, because they have a very large and established community on Stack Overflow in general, and they have some guidelines as to what you should and shouldn't ask there.
What's nice about Stack Overflow too is that a lot of times someone comes and asks an API question. It's actually a Java question. How do I parse the JSON that the API returns? And you could definitely use the client libraries, or you can just kind of use it without the client libraries and do things raw, and that'll work perfectly well. But you'll get back JSON, someone will say, well, how do I parse this JSON? Well, it's not really a YouTube API question.
Yes, and there's tons of folks on Stack Overflow. Honestly, the thing I like best about Stack Overflow is that folks not on the core team have been answering YouTube API questions, which is wonderful, because it really does foster more of a community, and it means that we don't necessarily have to be your only source of authoritative answers.
Now I have an add-on question to what Ibrahim asked, which is that on some teams at Google that provide APIs, they also have a Google group, which you would use for kind of meta discussion. Now Stack Overflow is good for coding questions. It's not very good for more general either policy questions or, hey, what's up? So is there a place for that?
Yeah, so there used to be. We did have a very active Google group actually, so that is no longer around. We did deliberately make the change from the Google group model to Stack Overflow. And we did lose a little bit in terms of being able to have those meta discussions, have things that aren't necessarily the best fit for the feature for the feature requests or bugs on the issue tracker. What I'd probably tell you to do is phrase it in a way that is more feature requesty or buggy and put it in the public issue tracker rather than putting it on Stack Overflow. Right. In that case, we do have our YouTube for Developers Google Plus page, and occasionally people will share things directly with us and ask us things there. Not necessarily the best way to get in touch with us because it's a little hard to maintain that. We kind of deliberately made the move towards fewer channels for communication so we could focus a little bit more on each channel and make sure that we had as close to 100% of the things that come up in each of those channels addressed as possible. So it's kind of a trade-off, but we had to make that. Maybe now the team's a little bit bigger.
Well, I mean, and we're always learning, right?
Yeah.
We're always learning about what model works for what, because I think Google Groups is very good for a few things. What gets really bad is when there's crossing of the streams. Ghostbusters is when people start asking coding questions on the groups, which are way better for Stack Overflow. When people start asking policy questions on Stack Overflow, which you're going to get downvoted real fast. Yeah. So.
Cool.
Do you have anything else?
I think that was like my first beginner questions.
Very, very good ones, because I don't think about these things too much, right? So it's always good to have like a new perspective, a fresh set of eyes on things.
Awesome.
Okay.
Cool. Well, that's probably it for the show for today then. I know that when I checked the Google moderator queue for the show right before the show started, we didn't have any questions from the general community out there. So apologies if you added a question since the show had started. We'll try to get your question next week in that case. And we kind of at the end of each show peg the fact that Google Developer Relations is hiring. YouTube Developer Relations has obviously recently made some hirings, but Google Developer Relations in general is still hiring. And
what locations are we hiring in?
I think we're hiring pretty globally.
We're hiring in Mountain View for sure. New York City, I know we're hiring.
Definitely in other areas of the globe as well. But I think the most authoritative source for that sort of information is developers.google.com/jobs. So, if you're out there and you think you might want to do what we're doing, just sitting around and talking.
what we should do is one of these days we should do a show about what we all do, right? We'll bring one guy from every team out and just, I don't know how we're going to do it here, but
like a Mr. Rogers type show.
Let me give you guys a sneak preview. Now, we're usually not allowed to do this, but I'm kind of a renegade. We're working on getting a better studio.
Censor button.
We're trying to get a better studio. Roman's like pushing the big red, like kick him off the ear button. No, we're trying to get a better studio space here. Now in Mountain View, they have a great studio space where they have shows where they can put like 5-6 people comfortably. We've got multiple cameras. We've got one camera, sometimes two in the studio. One time we should make a show about behind the scenes so you can see how we work here. But we are working on getting a slightly better studio space. Hopefully that works out for us.
There you go. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, for folks who were watching, I think it was our show with Magisto, at the very tail end of the show, there was somebody who was doing construction work in the room right behind us, and it sounded exactly like somebody was like breaking into a bank
doing
vault
construction.
It was like drilling and a few other background noises that hopefully we'll not have with this new studio space that Ikai leaked. I don't know.
You try to. That's going to make it to the top of CNN and Wall Street Journal. You didn't try to play it off as we intentionally put those sounds in because it's like you're constructing applications, right? Ooh.
I did not. Now that we have your improv skills are
right. Spin. So anyway, we've gone way over time now. We love talking to you guys. So hopefully you'll join us for next GDL, which is.
I don't know. Next
Wednesday. It's next Wednesday.
At 10 a.m. Pacific and 1 p.m. Eastern. I do not know what the topic is, but stay tuned probably next Monday when we announce them.
Right, and you'll find these shows at developers.google.com/live is where we'll find the schedule. You'll also find a lot of other great shows, so definitely check that site out.
Cool. All right. Congratulations on getting through your first show. And bye, everybody.
That was great. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.